Now, David Cameron's appointment as Foreign Secretary has certainly caused a stir with a number of Tory ministers praising his return to Cabinet. But Labour has called the move laughable, calling Cameron a life raft for Rishi Sunak, who just a few weeks ago said the former Prime Minister was part of a failed status quo.
Yeah, so will bringing back a former Tory statesman save Rishi Sunak, or will it lead to his downfall? Well, joining us in the studio now is Richard Power Sayeed, a former Labour official and author of The History of New Labour, The Future That Never Happened, and political strategist Lord Robert Hayward, Conservative peer and polling expert. Richard, I'm going to start with you. I mean, you know, you want a new Labour government to come in. This is what Sir Keir Starmer says he represents. You must be licking your lips and rubbing your hands together with glee at the king of austerity coming back to Cabinet.
Well, look, there's the politics of it, which I'm sure we're going to get into, but I think there's also something a little bit more fundamental for me, which is that this is a man who I think had a disastrous impact on this country. You know, if you think about the diabetic woman who last year, she had to wait 16 hours for an ambulance. She ended up dying. You know, David Cameron is the reason that she waited 16 hours for an ambulance. You think about the many women who were beaten up by their partners, managed to get safe houses, safe rooms in their homes. In the 2010s, there was a scheme for that. They ended up having to pay the bedroom tax because of David Cameron. You think about the crumbling schools and the nurses, who have to depend upon food banks. That is because of David Cameron. And this is the guy that Rishi Sunak wants as Foreign Secretary.
You know what's interesting about this is these situations, they make strange bedfellows. I don't want Cameron back. You don't want Cameron back. What on earth do you think is going through Rishi Sunak's mind? What possible advantage does he think he's going to gain by bringing back this old dinosaur who quit in 2016, got the entire nation wrong, got the mood of the nation wrong, has made bad political judgments throughout his checkered career? What on earth is the Prime Minister thinking? Why does he think bringing back Cameron in any way will be good for him?
Well, I would say I think this is a government that's flailing around. You know, they
say that again.
I tend to agree.
Yeah, that's a little bit obvious. It's sophisticated political chat coming from me here today. Earlier in the year, you could have said, OK, putting Lee Anderson in the cabinet, having Suella as his Home Secretary. This is him kind of gesturing to the right of the Conservative Party, gesturing to the red wall social conservatives. Then in his conference speech, suddenly it's kind of boring, technocratic, nothing to say, just waiting for inflation to sort itself out because hopefully Vladimir Putin will do something different. And then, kind of a few weeks later, it's having cleverly Hunt and Cameron as his top team, a bunch of privately educated, centre-right, kind of dinosaurs from the old school of the Conservative Party. Kind of people that Alex Phillips has managed to get out of politics.
No, I thought I got rid of David Cameron once and for all, but no.
That's flailing, For any one of those strategies, if they really went for it, I'm not saying it would succeed in getting them to government, but it would at least be coherent, right? But when you're trying to do all three in just a couple of months, that shows that you've got no control over yourself, let alone the country.
Do you know what I find depressing about this is it's not even any good to be a public school girl these days. You have to be a public school boy. Yeah. This is just a reversion to the politics we hoped we were getting rid of, that if you went to Oxford and Eton, like Cameron, you were quids in to have the top job for as long as you liked and all that. We're returning to all of that. Public school boys who went to Oxford. It's really not on, is it?
Well, I'm a private school boy who went to
That's
Cambridge,
not the
so
point,
I can't talk too much. But I mean,
champagne socialists always
well,
are.
exactly.
Yeah, you're not the Foreign Secretary.
I'd rather have you, to be honest.
More's the pity.
I think the country is safe from that danger. But you know what? This is why it's one of the reasons why I'm campaigning for a Labour government, right? when Starmer and if Starmer's shadow cabinet gets into government, that will be the most cabinet ministers from a state school background this country has ever had.
Good.
And I think that that's meaningful.
Good,
I don't think it's kind of meaningless representation. I think that is actually what we want our country to look like.
I mean, is it fair to say, actually, that this is pretty much giving Sir Keir Starmer a pretty easy time? No one's having to hold him that accountable. And every single time the pressure grows on the party, such as you're going to back a ceasefire or not, good old Rishi Sunak jumps up and does something absolutely mad.
I think that probably that debate's going to come back in the next few days. So I don't think you have to worry about Keir Starmer having too easy time with it. I think also, though, let's be honest about it, no Labour leader is, even if they've got the press against them, ultimately, if you've got your party unified behind you, as Keir Starmer does on pretty much everything, you're never going to have that difficult a time. And he's the one who's achieved that, ultimately. He's the one who's made that happen. So he deserves the credit.
So if you watch the Labour people on media rounds this morning, it was West Streeting this morning. He began the morning by saying, Suella Braverman's got to go. The language she's using is so inappropriate. She stirred up trouble. Rishi Sunak must fire her. Later on, he's going, well, he's done the right thing. He has fired her. In other words, you don't do what your enemy wants. And Sunak has done exactly what Labour wanted him to do. It's bad politics, isn't it?
I mean, I think the bad politics bit of it is not so much the specific decision, it's the flailing around bit, right? There are several different strategies the Conservative Party could try to employ at this point. It could try to push Keir out of the centre ground and try to reoccupy it. It could go strongly to the social conservative right, but if it does that, then it definitely can't do the kind of tax-cutting stuff, because that's unpopular with the same people. He's in a bind, right? He's in a real bind. And I don't pretend it's easy politics for him, but ultimately he is in the position that David Cameron's austerity put him in. It made the country angry. It screwed things up for an enormous number of people. And yeah, people want to punish him.
So the reason that Labour should do well out of this is, of course, that in appointing the old Remainer Prime Minister, we've already got the Remainer Chancellor of the Exchequer. Rishi always says, I was a Brexiteer. I don't remember seeing him much on the bus, do you?
He wasn't so famous at the time, to be fair on him.
Yeah, happy days. But he's basically formed a Remainer government. That's going to lose him the red wall, isn't he?
I'm not sure if that's what's going to loosen the red wall. I think it's the problem for him is that Brexit has stopped being so salient. And I think, Alex might say, well, let's see what the Supreme Court says about the ECHR this week. That might make Europe really politically relevant again. I don't know. But ultimately, this is a government at the end of its tether. I think if they had worked really hard to make Brexit a big thing for the next election, they could have done it, but it would have been so irresponsible. It would have really alienated large parts of the Conservative Party. Well,
let's bring in now Lord Robert Hayward, who's a Conservative peer and a polling expert. I mean, Richard Sayeed looking like the cat who's got the cream there. He thinks that, Rishi Sunak is doing a brilliant job for his boss, Sir Keir Starmer. But there he was saying that, this is essentially a divided party, isn't it? There's been a constant ideological battle over what the heart of the Conservative Party is. Is it those sort of red wall Brexiteers? Is it the sort of one nation, sort of more centre-right Europhile Conservatives? And Rishi Sunak's been oscillating between the two. But the needle of polling's not moving, is it? I mean, do you think this is a good decision he's made?
Before I come to answer your question, I will answer your question. Just pick up, Richard, on two things. And I want to do an analyst rather than a party political backwards and forwards. But Richard made two observations. One is he made about Rishi Sunak flailing backwards and forwards. And this is coming from a man who's there speaking on behalf of Keir Starmer, who's got a fair reputation for changing policies in one direction or another. And he also didn't refer to what the unemployment rate was when the Conservatives took control, when David Cameron became Prime Minister, which is 7.8%, and it's now down to 4%. So there are things on both sides. Now let's come to the serious analytical issue, which is your question. And that is, people criticize politicians for being unimaginative and all the rest of it. It's not an appointment that I would have made. It's not one that anybody expected, but it has certainly shaken up the political establishment in all sorts of different ways. And it's quite reasonable for Richard to say, look, there are reputations that David Cameron brings with him. And that's the risks that Rishi Sunak knows about. But this is a man who Richard would have been saying, and you would have been saying as well a few days ago, He never takes any risks. He's Mr. Supreme Caution, never takes a decision. You can't have it both ways. He either does take risky decisions, which I think he has done, or alternatively, he doesn't. And that's the position we're in today.
It seems to me, Robert, that he has calculated, you know, we've seen all these polls. If we had another Brexit vote tomorrow, that people would vote to remain, so say the polls. But it seems that that must be the way Rishi is thinking. Hence, he's sort of forming this Remainer centrist government. I suspect he might be wrong on that. And certainly by bringing back the old Remainer Prime Minister, we've got a Remainer Chancellor. God knows what the Prime Minister is actually himself. But it looks like a Remainer government. That's going to alienate the red wall. There goes the Tory government.
Let's be clear. He was very clear he was a Brexiteer. Equally, and I'm going to give you some solace here, if somebody had asked me about the opinion polls that say that the majority want to vote Remain, I'd have said, don't believe the polls. I said, and I discussed this with Nigel Farage, on the day of the referendum, I said the nation was going to vote to leave. I voted Remain, but I was absolutely clear. And therefore, Rishi Sunak's not taken this decision in relation to some set of opinion polls which go backwards and forwards in one form or another, other than the fact that at the moment the Tories are stuck in a rut. But certainly don't believe the polls on Remain Brexit.
Yeah, Lord Robert Hayward, thank you so much. Might be relieved, actually, that might breathe some life into the House of Lords, having the Foreign Secretary sitting there rather than on the green benches.